the Parsha, the story of the spies, starts with the spies being sent into the land of Israel, and they're told to check out the land to see if they can go and if the Jews are going to be successful in being able to settle the land. They come back, as we know, with the story about the land. They didn't really tell any lies about the land, but the way that they told over what they saw about the land, the way that they showed the fruit and the impressions that they tried to give, that in itself was the Yetzias Diba. That in itself was the Lashon Hara that they spoke about the land. So the question that the commentaries grapple with is that, what was their motivation? These were supposedly in the beginning, these were good people. Why in the world would they have done this, putting the Jewish people in such danger that God was going to be upset that they were going to reject the land of Israel and then not go immediately into the land of Israel? Why would they have done that? Why would they have put in peril all of the other people in the nation and come back and put them in such a dangerous position? So our rabbis deal with this. And the main answer is, one of the main answers that's given is that, in fact, they had really sinister plans. And their plans were because they didn't want to lose their positions. They were worried that when they go into the land of Israel, they were no longer going to be in the managerial positions that they were in, which, by the way, you have to understand that they were in positions that there were 18,000 other people just like them. This is middle management. This wasn't the top management. This is middle management, 18,000 other people. But that's what Kavod does. They had Kavodic jobs, they had positions of honor, and they didn't want to tamper with those positions of honor. And when you're out for your own honor, you could put the ones you love into tremendous danger. And, the variations on that theme, that's really what the rabbis explained, that it was really about their own kavod. It was really about their own honor, and that's why they did it. But I think that there might be another way to look at it. Something, as our rabbis say, something a little more positive. That the Meraglim were petrified. They were worried that look what happens to Jews that live they were living in a spiritual la-la land. They were living inside of clouds of glory. Their feet didn't touch the ground. The elements didn't bother them. It wasn't too sunny, it wasn't too windy, it wasn't too anything. The scorpions didn't get to them. The snakes didn't get to them. They were living in a hermetically sealed environment. They were living in incredible safety. And yet, they still questioned where God was. They still questioned, where's the food? They still rejected the man. Imagine what's going to happen when you have to work for a living. Imagine what's going to happen when when you come into the land, and you're going to have to plant every kind of fruit tree, and you're going to have to tend the trees. And this tree is going to need this kind of tipul, and this tree is going to need this kind of tipul, and you're going to have to worry about the land and about rejuvenating the land and about letting it lie fallow every 7 years, and you're going to have to worry about so many details of your existence, and you're going to be responsible for your own existence. Imagine the challenge that's going to happen then, and the inability to be able to see the hand of God then. If you couldn't see it now, if now you were questioning and now you were falling apart, then only imagine what's going to happen when you live inside of a land where you have to work for a living and you have to make things happen yourself. And therefore they were petrified that the Jews were never going to be able to maintain themselves and not be able to maintain the relationship with God in a land of trees and planting and working. But they made a big mistake, because their fear might have been correct and might have been founded. But they discounted the fact that we are a resilient people, and that this entire experience in the desert was meant to teach us how to analyze and how to make choices. One of the reasons that the spies were taken to task is if you look at the connection between last week's parsha and this week's parsha. The end of last week's parsha, talking about the Lashon Hara of Miriam. The beginning of this week's parsha, the Lashon Hara of the spies, that they saw what happened to Miriam and they didn't learn a lesson. That's Rashi teaches us that. What a crazy thing, though. Listen to what was being asked of them. They were supposed to look at a story that happened with Miriam speaking about a human being, and they were supposed to extrapolate from there and say, oh my gosh, look what happened to Miriam when she spoke Lashon Hara. Can you imagine what's going to happen if you speak Lashon Hara about the land of Israel? Like, what's the shaykhus? What's the connection? How would they have made that jump and that leap from the one story to the other story? That's exactly what was being demanded of them. Be perceptive. Keep your eyes open. Analyze things. Be analytical. Don't just live in life. Be aware of the things that are going on. And when you're aware, you can make a connection easily from an event of Lashon Hara about a brother to talking bad about the land of Israel. But that's only if your eyes are open. And when your eyes are open, decisions are much easier. Because when you can see, we spoke the other day about Roa es hanolad, when you can see things that have not, when you see things that have not yet happened, when you see things that have not yet materialized, that we called was wisdom. That was a wise person who can see down the road, see things that haven't yet developed. That's what's demanded of us. Keep your eyes open. Learn how to make choices by keeping your eyes open and analyzing and understanding the world. You know, God comes to Moshe and he says, Shlach lecha, send for you the spies. And our commentaries make a big deal about the fact that God said, send for you. And they explain that God didn't really want the spies to be sent. God already made the promise. He told them they were going to get the land of Israel. But what God wanted was that if Moshe felt that he should send them in, send them in. Think of what happened. God gave Moshe the ability to be able to make a choice. And look at how bad it ended up. 38 years they languished in the desert because it went the wrong way. If that's the case, why did God give Moshe the rope to hang himself on? Why didn't he say to Moshe, let me explain this to you? No. Bad choice. Let me save you from a lot of heartache. Let me save you from a lot of pain. You know why God didn't do that? Because that's not the way you learn how to make choices. The only way you learn how to make choices is by making mistakes. And when you make a mistake and you realize, you analyze, you look at it deeply and you realize, you know what? That was the wrong choice. The next time you're faced with that choice, it works out very differently. God was teaching us every single step of the way. He allowed us the ability to be able to make those choices, because that's what we needed in order to be able to go into the land of Israel. You want to go out of the spiritual la-la land? You want to now live in a land where you have to work? You want to live in a land where you're challenged? You want to live in a land where tragedies happened? You want to live in a life where difficult things are happening every day? The tool that I need to give you is I need to teach you how to make choices. And to make choices, I need to teach you how to open up your eyes. And that is the story of the spies. The end of the parsha of the spies is the parsha of tzitzis. Tzitzis, we have a blue strand in the tzitzis. And why do we have a blue strand in the tzitzis? Why, tchelas? Because when you look at the blue strand, it reminds you of the sea. And when you look at the sea, it reminds you of the sky. And when you look at the sky, it reminds you of the kisei hakavod, of God's throne. Do me a favor. Just put a little charm of God's throne on the tzitzis, and that would be an easy reminder. What do you need a blue thread for? If you want to see God's throne, then make a little picture of God's throne and walk around with God's throne. You have to have a blue thread that reminds me of this, which reminds me of that. It sounds like Chad Gadya on my clothes. Like, what am I doing? Just tell me the story straight. What are you giving me? This will remind you of that, will remind you of that. Because it's teaching me how to look deep in the world. You see a color blue. What does that color blue say to you? Don't just look at a color blue, but what does that remind you of? Where does that bring you? Let it take you to places. Because when you can look at the depth of the world, when you can see behind the surface, when you're a roa es hanolad, when you are able to see things that have not yet come into this world, so that's when you can make choices. It's difficult to make choices when you can't tell the difference between blue and white, when you can't tell the difference between things. But when you can tell the difference between them because you've looked at them in the eye and you can see what they really are, choices are much easier. And if you ask me what Parshas Shlach is really about, Parshas Shlach is about God teaching us how to make choices, how to look deeper at things, how not to get lost on the surface. And if you ask me to connect that to everything we studied these past 2 weeks in Pirkei Avos, it's all about seeing things deeper, objectively, for what they really are. And when we do that, making the right choices is much easier. Our job is to teach the world how to think that way, how to see that way, how not to live superficially and not to live on the surface and not to take things just for face value, but to understand that every single thing in this world has such incredible depth. All we have to do is uncover that depth, and then we can make the right choices and continue to move our lives forward. That's my thought on this week's Parsha. My cap to everything that we've been doing in Pirkei Avos, and my introduction to the next section of Pirkei Avos. I shouldn't say section really, but just the next step that we're going to take in Pirkei Avos, which is that after we did the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, now the next mission is going to tell us they said 3 things, meaning every one of those students taught us their main teachings of what they based their life on. And one of the things that I said that we'll see is, if you notice when I sent that chart to you, you'll notice that the last column was blank, because we're going to have to fill in that last column, because each one of those rabbis, the 3 things that he said, fit in consistently with what they were praised for, what that meant, what the best path was, what the worst path was, and then how they lived their lives. That's the next section that we're going to see. Okay, Sunday morning in Yirtzeh Hashem, 8:45. Andy asked me, Rabbi, spies did not lie, right? Correct. First of all, you have to understand, Lashon Hara is not a lie. Lashon Hara is true. Got to know your prohibitions and love them. There's a separate prohibition to lie. Telling stories about another person that's a lie, that's a separate prohibition. Lashon Hara is the absolute truth, but said in a way that gives a negative impression of a person. And that's what they did. That was the Lashon Hara of the spies, is that they didn't say anything that wasn't true per se. There was a little bit on the edge, but they didn't say anything that wasn't true. But the impression that they gave was that there's no way that we could take over this land. They did step out of line a bit by saying that we're not going to be capable. We're not capable of this, and what they really meant was that God is not capable. They wanted to leave that impression with the Jews. But it was more about the impressions of the way that they said their things than in the actual words. And very important to remember that Lashon Hara is true. So when you lie about another person, you've committed another transgression, not Lashon Hara, but a whole nother transgression. Worse, not worse, doesn't make a difference, but a whole nother transgression.